Derivatives trading involves substantial risk of loss and is not suitable for all investors. Past performance is not necessarily indicative of future results.
Good morning, everyone. It is Monday, May 20th, 2024. My name is John Pieranunzi, and this is the opening swing. Let's begin today, as we always do, with our news. Out of Europe, essentially nothing. We had one BOE speaker, that was it. Into the U.S. hours, no 8:30 news driver, just a parade of Fed speakers. Bostic, Barr, Waller, Jefferson, Bostic again. Mester is also on this calendar, or not on this calendar, but is speaking today. So pretty much just Fed speakers today. A few short-term Treasury auctions. Tomorrow, more Fed speakers, and it gets a little bit busier into Wednesday, but overall pretty quiet. So that's what we're looking at. Very quickly, we'll just glance at our weekly chart. We've spent a lot of time on the higher time frame chart, so we won't spend a lot of time here. The only thing that we want to see is the one time framing on the weekly is continuing. We're well above the prior week's low, and we're actually above the prior week's settle right now, and above this prior all-time high of 33.5. There's a gap to settle today. As of right now, there's a gap to settle. The other thing to notice, this high, these 85s, that was my target. That was a weekly target for this week. We took it out. It's important this week as well, because below that is our RTH gap zone. So these 85s are the landmark for me on the weekly time frame should we revert. Let's take a look at the daily. Daily, looking at last week, we opened Monday kind of quiet, tested lower on Tuesday, and then exploded higher when we got our CPI number. Thursday, we continued that impulse. We got the completion of it, and then we also got the pullback on Friday. So very key, we have here our 49s, last week's high and the all-time high, and then here the 575s. So these two, this high and this low, are very important. They're kind of the bounds, the initial bounds of our trade here, and those prices are important. And then also within, we have very important our settlement. So which side of settlement and this sort of busy area in the middle, we have settlement, prior day's high, 33.5, basically like 27s to 40s, we'll go over it. But how we treat this area is going to be our clue as to whether we test this high or this low. We may not do either today. There's a pretty good chance we don't do either today. But anyway, let's go on to lower time frame charts and discuss that further. Here we have our 4x5 PNF, which is a chart I use to look at market structure and volume profile in a slightly larger time frame. We've been over a lot of this. We had our impulse back here, pullback, continuation. This is our CPI fight here from 84 to 03. We have our gap zone below the 84s. This area has presented itself as the lower bounds to our trade, as I mentioned with our 0575's low. I was looking for 03s on Friday as a potential area to test and start to get bullish from. We didn't even get that test, and we didn't get the test of the 33.5s either. Very muted session on Friday, and I'll note now that's kind of something that happens in environments like this. Environments like this meaning coming into summer, all-time highs and sparse news. That's an environment where expected tests kind of fall short. I've mentioned that, and that happened here, and we didn't get the 33 test. So that's just something we want to be aware of, as a potentially quieter trade happening. That being said, the key bounce here, there's not a lot new to see. Prior week's high, all-time high up here. 41s, because the trade is a little tighter. 41s are an area where I'm aware of might get a minor reaction. And then we have these 9 to 18s. I have this marked because this is, if we get a test and a higher low, I would expect it to be in this area. And then obviously, if we get some type of a test that finds buyers, I would expect it to be somewhere above the 95s. Let's go to a lower time frame chart and talk about this further. Okay, here's our 2x4 PNF, pretty similar to an 8 box. What areas are important today? Well, we have like I said, we have a gap to settle open. So the developing overnight low is quite important. And then we also have like I said, really this whole area from about 33s down to, we'll call it 24s, this sort of area, which is just chop. I mean, there's a lot of chop here, but it's this area. Then I have this area, which I mentioned, if we get a higher low versus Friday, I think there's potential for it to be there. If we instead test below Friday low, I would expect that test to be somewhere from the 0575s down to about 95s. And if we get below that, then I'm looking at the area from 84s to 95s, and below that is our gap zone. If we should somehow get below that, then obviously we're looking at 75s. These are areas we've talked about, and below that 64s. I'm not going to go out that far today. Above we have these 41s, which is a very minor area, but I'm marking it. And then we also have obviously our all-time high region. 75s are the important strike above. That's a pretty good distance. So we're also aware of like the 60, 65 area, just it's where one vola is. It's not a structured level, but just an area where we might see the excursion just kind of sort of peter out. Don't count on that though, because we don't know what happens at prices we haven't traded yet. So what could happen today? First off, so there are three buckets. Let's go over the three buckets that could happen. Bucket A is bullish. Bucket A is bullish where we keep this gap to settle open. If we keep this gap to settle open, then obviously we could just sort of grind higher, and this would sort of be the most expected, most frustrating action, just kind of a grind up, takes these 41s, falls back, moves up, takes the 49s, falls back, just kind of holds these little pullbacks and just kind of continues and gives a grind. That would be the most boring and potentially most likely bullish scenario in bucket A, which means gap to settle kept open, grind higher. That's bucket A. I'll flag right now, as I often do, any of these areas, which could be 41s, could be 49s, could be some test above, would be vulnerable to a deeper pullback that falls back into whatever area it came from. So in this case, it would be the 49s. Something that falls back into the 49s without showing any kind of respect. Balances, makes some attempt to get this high, cannot get the high, and then just falls lower. So if we see that, we know that this music has changed and we're either balancing or we're going to explore prices lower, and we'll just look the other way at the targets below, which of course would be 41s and then this area, and of course the gap to settle. But this is kind of bucket A. Gap to settle holds open, we get excursion higher. Then if we get that, then we'd be aware that we could also get the reversion in some area here. So this is bucket A. Bucket B is anything that happens that breaks below our developing overnight low. Anything that gets below that and wants to show excursion. So that could look something like any one of these tests, a fall below that gets in the prior week's VPOC, cannot recover these 33 areas, and then just all of these areas above start becoming resistance for potentially a test of, well, we have the prior week's VPOC here, but a potential test in this 9 to 18 area, which, as I've said, I'm flagging that would be a potential area for a higher low that could get back into this area and continue. But sort of this region is where I'm looking at, as I mentioned, if we get a higher low versus Friday, a test and a higher low, I think it would happen in that area. If instead we continue lower, like I said, this is the area where I would think if we get a test below, it would happen 95s to 03s. This could all still be just a test in here. There could be trades for some of these areas, trades for the 18s on a short scalp or the prior day's low if it presents. But we just want to also be aware that in this environment, there's going to be a lot of gravity pulling us back to the middle. So these are all areas where we could then find some support and reversion. If we get into the 95s, any of these areas, again, I would expect support on an initial push. How would we know if we're not seeing the support? Well, let's just quickly go over it because it might be useful. And I've done webinars on this for Convergent, so you know, if you're a Convergent member, check it out. But if we get a test, like say into this area, and I'm looking at, well, let's do the yesterday's low. So if we get a test into yesterday's low, if this test goes, we breach yesterday's low, we try to go. So what am I looking for? Well, if we can get above the prior high and then hold that region on pullbacks and then start to take that high, that to me is a sign that things are getting bullish. However, if we instead attempt to take this high, but we can't hold it, and then we instead take this low, then that's telling me that the bearish bias is continuing. And then we are unable to get that high. So it sounds very elementary, but a lot of this is simpler than you think. But that's pretty much what I look for in these tests to see if we're gonna, do I want to continue to press a short or do I want to trade a long? That's kind of how I do it. But anyway, so bucket A is that we hold the gap to settle open and we get excursion higher. Should use blue, but whatever. Bucket B is we break into this area and we start to get excursion lower, maybe into the 18s for a higher low, maybe for a test of the prior day's low and continuation. If we breach the prior day's low and we keep going, that is a possibility. We know the target's down here, but I'll be honest, it's not something I'm expecting today. Could easily happen, but it's not a primary expectation of mine today. But we know, we go over this every day, so we're aware of every potentiality. What's our nothing scenario? Our nothing scenario is anything that exists within 49s to 05s. That's a nothing scenario to me because there's just not a lot to go on. How would I trade that? I would be very cautious and I would look for scalps, ideally for stats. The overnight stat, the IB stat, prior settle stat if we get it, overnight VPOC stat. I will look for small, like trades with less risk for those targets. Sometimes they're available, sometimes they're not. But that's what I'd be looking at today. This also could be valid with any kind of a test outside that gets back to the middle. Could happen in either way. So once again, those are our three buckets. Our bucket 1, hold gap to settle open, excursion higher. Bucket 2, break gap to settle, continue lower for a test of either 18s or maybe outside of the prior day's low with some reversion. And bucket 3 is we just do nothing in this area, in which case that'll be something that you probably want to be more conservative with. I'll add, with this kind of environment, which is all-time highs, less interesting news, less excursion in equities, if this continues, we're going to really start looking at crude oil as potential, is something else that could kind of give us opportunity for my style of trading. I love trading crude. It's wonderful. It's a great market. I think it's really good to trade. Can't trade as much size, but for a lot of us, that's not a big deal. But anyway, so that's what I'm looking at today. I'm going to cut it off because somehow I'm creeping along already on a day that where there's nothing going on, but that's kind of how it goes. I hope that this was complete for you guys. I hope it gives you an idea of what I'm looking at going into today, and I hope that that helps you in some way. I also hope that you're having a wonderful morning in progress, and I hope that that continues, and maybe even you can make someone else smile today, because that's the best thing you can do each day. That's what I have for you. I hope you can improve your trading, and I'll be here tomorrow. So good luck, everybody. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.